hiking these taxes makes our economy a whole lot less competitive. So if we really want to respond to President Trump, and we should do it in a way that actually makes us stronger, that actually makes it so that, the next time around, if the US wants to threaten us with tariffs again, well, we can just, say, okay, we'll just trade more with the rest of the world.
You're listening to the Canadian Taxpayers Podcast, where we're fighting for lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. I'm your federal director here in Ottawa, Franco Terrazzano, and we got a special episode for you folks today. I'm joined by the Montreal Economic Institute's Vice President of Communications, Renaud Brossard. And for you longtime listeners and followers of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, you'll remember Renaud because he was a colleague of ours, right? He was our great Quebec director for a very long time. But today, Renaud, you're on the show because I really want to unpack what's going on with this trade war. What tariffs and retaliatory tariffs mean for Canadians. And the Montreal Economic Institute released a report that really caught my eye. So, Renaud, I want to jump into it, okay? What does your research say about the government of Canada, so the retaliatory tariffs and their impact on Canadians? What does your report say?
Well, honestly, first off, Franco, I want to say it's great to be back. Always love to be on a CTF podcast, and it feels like a second home away from home, honestly. Now, about what we're seeing for Canada's counter tariffs, we looked at the data. We looked at what the Department of Finance says. It turns out that for only 2 months, so April and May, Canada's retaliatory tariffs cost Canadian families about $92 on average. And now, look, I know $92 doesn't seem like much. I got to admit, though, I would prefer having that money in my pockets as opposed to the government's coffers. But $92 doesn't seem like much. But if we are to continue at this rhythm, because, these counter tariffs have not only been applied for 2 months, it seems like they are here to stay for a certain amount of time. If we continue going down this road, by the end of the year, Canadian families will have paid $550, not because of Donald Trump's tariffs, but because of Mark Carney's tariffs on American imported products into Canada, which are tariffs that we pay as consumers and Canadian businesses pay as they rely on some U.S. inputs to make some of their products.
Well, I think that's just worth repeating. So I'm just going to repeat what you said there, because those are some big numbers, right? By the end of the year, the government of Canada's tariffs will cost Canadians, a Canadian family, about $550, right? And that's the tariffs that the government of Canada is imposing, not Donald Trump's. Those are the retaliatory tariffs from our own government, costing Canadian families hundreds of dollars over the year, already costing us about $92 over the first 2 months, $550 by the end of the year. That is a lot of money. That really adds up. But Renaud, I mean, you've been following the economics of trade for a very long time, right? You know this stuff like the back of your hand. So, can you kind of take a step back? Can you break down, what a tariff is, what a retaliatory tariff is, who ultimately pays those tariffs, and also just the current state of the trade war going on? And I just want to preface this, folks, it's August the 7th that we're recording. Who knows how things are going to change? But Renaud, give us the framework here.
Absolutely. And yeah, as of August the 7th at 10:04 a.m., here's roughly where we're at. Look, the word tariffs is being thrown around. Counter tariffs are being thrown around. They're about the same thing. They're an import tax. It's a fancy word for a tax on imported products. And whether it is a tariff or retaliatory tariffs, it works the same exact way. The people that pay for it, they're not foreign countries, they're not foreign companies. They're the companies here that import those products, and down the line, the consumers of of those companies that import those products. So let's take for example, there's been a lot of talk about this idea of buying Canadian. A lot of the things that we buy, we just don't realize that part of that product comes from another country. The way that our supply chains are built, they are interconnected across borders because there are things that we are better at and we do those things very well, but there are things that Mexico is better at and things that the US is better at, and that's how these supply chains are built. So let's take a can of beer, for instance. Most Canadian beer is actually consumed in Canada. So last year, Canadian breweries had revenues of about $3.3 billion. Out of that, about $100 million went to the US. So not nothing, but about 3% of their business. But breweries have been warning actually that the tariffs and especially the counter tariffs would be a direct harm to their business. And the reason why is so Canada is a very, very large producer of aluminum. The US is not. The US produces about 10% of the aluminum it needs. And one thing that beer comes in is these cans, right? They're aluminum cans. So we produce a lot of aluminum, but we don't have any place that does that rolls aluminum into flat sheets, the kind that you need to make these beer cans. So the way that the industry is set up is rolling mills in the US will buy mostly Canadian aluminum because we do it well and we do it at a very competitive price. Honestly, aluminum is one of those things where you need a lot of very affordable energy to be able to do it. And that's something that, northern BC at the border with Alberta has a lot of, and a thing that Quebec has a lot of with its hydro dam. So we do it very, very well. So we export that to the US. Then the rolling mill in the US will simply flatten it into a sheet. It's one of those things where you have very thin margins, but it's a specialized product that we need. And those sheets of aluminum are then going to be exported back to Canada, where some industries will make them into cans, into various other products, and then our breweries are going to buy those cans. Well, so the breweries are estimated that because of the Trump tariffs on aluminum Canadian aluminum being sent to the US, but then the Canadian tariffs on American aluminum products being sent to Canada, that they're going to get about a $330 million hit to their bottom line because of these counter tariffs. And you, as a consumer, when you go to, your local beer store or to your local corner store and you buy a can of beer, well, you end up paying more money for that. When you go to a restaurant, a breakfast restaurant in the morning, and you get a glass of orange juice, look, I'm not aware of any place where we grow oranges in this country just yet, or at least not in the right amount that we can make the ton of orange juice that we consume here. So this comes in large part from the US. Well, even when we try to buy Canadian products, there's other elements like that where there's a small element that comes from the US and we end up paying the tariffs there. Or sometimes there's also indirect cost. Maybe that company, that restaurant decided to stop buying American orange juice, but it's going to start buying Spanish orange juice instead, and it's a little bit more expensive. That's why I didn't buy it before. But then, the fact that it's more expensive, it becomes a more expensive item on the menu, and who ends up paying for it? Once again, it's you as a consumer, you as a taxpayer. So that's why all of these tariffs, again, fancy word for import taxes, they are being paid for by the people and the businesses in the country that imposes them. So when Donald Trump's imposing tariffs on Canadian products, American consumers of those products are paying for them. And when Mark Carney is imposing retaliatory tariffs on American products, Canadian consumers and businesses are the ones who are paying for this.
That's a great place to end your analysis there, Renaud, because tariffs are taxes, right? Tariffs are taxes that your government imposes on you, right? So when the U.S. government, when President Donald Trump imposes tariffs, that is a tax on American businesses and therefore American consumers, right? When the Carney government, the government of Canada, imposes tariffs or retaliatory tariffs, it doesn't matter what they call them, those are taxes imposed on Canadian businesses and therefore making life also more expensive on Canadian consumers, right? Tariffs are taxes, end of story. Now, Renaud, the Montreal Economic Institute released some polling about Canadian finances and also Canadians' perception about tariffs. And it looks like Canadians understand that, tariffs is just another word for tax that makes life more expensive. So, Renaud, can you just, shed some light on the polling that you guys put out?
Well, certainly. And look, I think it's good that at least Canadians understand this and they are aware these are taxes. So we asked Canadians, and it turns out that 77%, so roughly 8 in 10 people say that, they've noticed that counter tariffs, so Mark Carney's government's tariffs on American imports, have made their everyday essentials more expensive. They've noticed that at the grocery store. They've noticed it when they go out to restaurants to eat. They've noticed it when they buy a variety of different products, that the price has gone up, and that these tariffs are part of that cause. And let's be clear here, it's not like we're coming off of this era of very low inflation and everybody's got money to go around. People were already had very tight budgets. The inflation of the last couple of years, it has hurt families a lot. It has made a lot of people less well off, even though they got a bit of a salary increase. Inflation has been so much faster than the salary increases, and they are feeling the pinch, especially, fixed income seniors, for instance. They are feeling the pinch. And I think it's time that we realize that this sort of elbows up strategy so far has been mostly about posturing. It's been about trying to show that we're, if the U.S. is going to shoot itself in the foot, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot twice as hard. It's not something that works. Rather, we should be focusing on something that makes our economy stronger. And I think, you of all people, Franco, and I think all the listeners here understand that taxes are not something that makes our economy stronger. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I kind of understand the emotion, right? I understand it, right? When a bully comes to you and steps to you, right? Nothing gives you more mental pleasure than the idea of punching back. But a tariff, which is just a tax on yourself, is just a punch that lands across your own jaw, right? It makes your own standard of living worse. And I just want to recap some of the Montreal Economic Institute's research here, right? Where our own government, so the Carney government's retaliatory tariffs have already cost a family about $92 over just 2 months. Those tariffs will end up costing about $550 over the year. You have polling that shows that 77% of Canadians say that Canada's tariffs are increasing costs right here at home. That's a huge number. I do want to highlight some of this on some more research that I've seen that shows that retaliatory tariffs from Canada makes life more expensive for Canadians. So I saw some research during the early days of the trade dispute that said that, American tariffs of about 25% would cost each Canadian about $1,300, right? So yes, American tariffs will hurt Canada's economy because trade is the lifeblood of a market economy. But if Canada retaliates, that cost would jump from $1,300 to $1,900 per Canadian, right? So it just goes to show that retaliatory tariffs would hurt our economy even worse, and also just make life more expensive for Canadians.
You're absolutely right. And honestly, if I may, there's a really good U.S. example of that. Because, President Trump's been talking about tariffs as a way to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. Part of the problem is that there's a lot of manufacturing jobs that depend on imported products to do it. So, as I mentioned, the U.S. makes about 10% of the aluminum it needs. That aluminum then gets transformed into cars, into planes, into beer cans, into all sorts of different products that have a significant value add. Actually, the largest exporter of U.S. goods by value is this, small company out of Seattle called Boeing. They export planes, right? These are big aluminum cans flying in the sky, and they're quite expensive. So look at it from this perspective. If your goal is to bring back American manufacturing, when you have a 50% tariff on imported aluminum to the U.S., well, it's pretty much everything in the supply chain for Boeing that just ends up going up in cost. So a lot of the smaller businesses from which Boeing sources parts, they still need to get their aluminum. They're still going to have to pay for it. And it's not like there's a bunch of idle aluminum smelters in the U.S. There's none really. There's one. There's a handful of them, but they're not idle. They're already producing, and they're only producing 1/10 of what the U.S. needs to consume. So option A, they're going to keep buying Canadian aluminum. They're going to have to pay a 50% tax because of President Trump for it. So option A is expensive. Option B, they're going to find one of those aluminum smelters in the U.S. and buy their aluminum from there. But, let's say that you're that aluminum smelter and you see that your main competitor, the ones that can really outbid you and make everything a little bit less expensive, well, their price has gone up by 50%. Are you going to keep selling the same price, or are you going to bring your price up to match roughly that of your competition? So the cost of that goes up. Now that business that then sells these parts to Boeing is either going to have to bring up its price or to shut down and eat in its profits and reduce its production. For Boeing, if it comes to only the domestic airline market, the domestic aircraft market, well, they're probably still going to be the most competitive game around, because if you want to buy a plane from Airbus, you're still going to have an expensive tariff to pay to sell that good to the US. But Boeing is a global company. It doesn't just sell to the US. It also sells to places like Canada, like China, like the European Union. Well, if you make Boeing's manufacturing more expensive, Boeing is going to be a whole lot less competitive selling in those markets. Its main competitor, Airbus, is not going to have to pay for those costs. So it is going to shoot Boeing in the foot. Now, again, this is a US example, but try to imagine what it does to Canadian companies. When you have those same retaliatory tariffs on aluminum, as I was telling you, the beer industry said, and this was back in March, that they expected this to increase their costs by $330 million a year. There's a lot of the auto industry that's also been warning that there's a bunch of different products that they need from the US and that are being affected by these counter tariffs. Hiking these taxes makes our economy a whole lot less competitive. So if we really want to respond to President Trump, and we should do it in a way that actually makes us stronger, that actually makes it so that, the next time around, if the US wants to threaten us with tariffs again, well, we can just, say, okay, we'll just trade more with the rest of the world. But the ways to do that, they're not about taxing Canadians. And maybe they're not as satisfying as punching back with exactly the same thing, even though it's going to hit us in the jaw. But it's things like making project approvals faster. It's no secret that Bill C-69, the No Pipelines Law, has made it nearly impossible to get our energy to new markets. We looked at it in the MEI. If we had built Energy East, if we had built LNG Saguenay, we would have been able to send about $38 billion worth of petroleum products and LNG to other markets in the face of Trump's tariff threats. That is making Canada stronger. Then it's things like reviewing our regulation. Over the course of the last 20 years, federal regulations have grown by 37%. Canadian companies are now submitted to about 321,000 different lines of regulation. So try to imagine starting a business in this environment, and you need to spend a lot of your time not growing your business, but looking line by line to see if you fit with all the different small boxes that feds impose on you. And that's just the federal regulations. Then you get into provincial stuff. There's some municipal stuff. It becomes a nightmare. So having a regulatory review, that would make our economy stronger. It might not be as, again, like it's not something that makes the flashy press releases of, oh yeah, we're doing counter tariffs. But it's actually what's going to work. It's what's going to make Canada stronger. It's what's going to make our economy better, and something that's going to bring back investment here, create good jobs, and make a lasting effect on our prosperity.
Yeah, look, retaliatory tariffs, knee-jerk retaliatory tariffs from the government of Canada, like that will make life more expensive for Canadians who can't afford it. But it already
has.
It already has. And that's, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to keep jumping into stuff like what should the government of Canada do instead? And I'm always like, look, what we should be doing, what would really, tick the U.S. off is if we take their lunch money. If we make Canada the best place in the world to invest, do business, and work in, right? And you already mentioned a couple things, right? You said slash the unnecessary red tape, right? We got to be able to let job creators build major natural resource projects, right? I saw a stat that said Canada saw, nearly $670 billion in natural resource projects suspended or canceled since 2015, right? So you mentioned Bill C-69. There was also the discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast. You had so many politicians provincially as well chasing away job creators who wanted to build pipelines. Renaud, any other solutions that you have that Canada should pursue to make our economy fire on all cylinders?
Well, the other thing is, again, we should look at our own tariffs. If U.S. tariffs are taxed on U.S. citizens, Canadian tariffs are taxed on Canadian citizens. And I got to admit, we are better than the U.S. So there's some ratings that have been done on tariff levels. The U.S. ranks about 24th. We rank 4th. So we're doing much better, but there's still a ways to go. And there's still various tariffs that we charge on various goods that are making us much less competitive and that are costing us a lot of money. A very good example would be the ones that we charge to protect our supply management system, which is effectively costing hundreds of extra dollars per Canadian family in grocery bills as it drives up the cost of milk, poultry, and eggs. So there's a lot we can do to reduce those tariff barriers. The other part is what we call non-tariff barriers. These are mostly regulations that are aimed at curbing imports. these are the objective with these things is always to try and protect one specific industry. The problem is everything down the line then becomes bogged down by the cost of these protections, which then costs more job down the line than what is is actually saved by these protections. So we could drop those tariffs and non-tariff barriers with the rest of the world, and that would actually be a good way to show the U.S. That if they want to charge taxes on our products, we can simply trade with other people. And dropping those tariffs is something that's gonna, and non-tariff barriers is something that's gonna help. But the other thing it can do is also simply make our businesses a whole lot more competitive, because then they're not gonna have to pay more for their inputs, and they're going to be able to compete with foreign manufacturers with an advantage, because they won't have these various tariffs and non-tariff barriers and heavy regulations bring them down. But it's estimated that if we were to drop all Canadian tariffs, Canada's GDP would go up by 1.7%. Now, that doesn't seem like much, but when you've got a $3 trillion economy, 1.7% is a lot of billions of dollars. And again, this is higher wages, better jobs for people, new investment coming into the country. But the other part is it's also estimated it would make the price of goods go down by about 1.5%. And again, doesn't seem like much, but after the high inflation episode that we just went through, I don't know about you, but I'd be happy if my grocery bill was 1.5% cheaper. If whenever I went out to the restaurant was 1.5% cheaper, I wouldn't complain about it. So that's something we could do. But the other part is also we can look at our own internal trade barriers, right? Because it's one of those things that we've been talking about forever. We signed the first pan-Canadian free trade deal back in the 90s. And every province and every premier from every province and territory got together and said, yes, we want to make it easier to trade within Canada. We want to make sure that it's no longer easier to sell goods to London, UK than London, Ontario. And since then, we've signed a bunch more of these deals, but there's been very little action, because every single time these deals are signed, a good part of what is preventing us from trading with one another is a bunch of different regulations. So when the government of Saskatchewan regulates one way, it progressively adds its own regulations with its own specificities. And then neighboring Manitoba does the same thing. Quebec does the same thing. And in French, every single province builds its own regulatory silo. And every single time, so everybody agrees that we need to be able to trade easier between our provinces. All the premiers agree. But every single time they go to a meeting, behind closed doors, they say, okay, we believe that we should harmonize regulations to make trading easier, and this is why everybody should follow Quebec's model. And then Ontario says, we agree with you, but it should be Ontario's model. The reason why we haven't been able to trade so freely in this country is because the bureaucrats and politicians can't agree on how to do it. It's not because the people don't want it. So freeing up that trade, doing things like mutual recognition, which Nova Scotia, Ontario, PEI have done so far, Manitoba to a lesser extent, is something that goes in the right direction, that makes that trade easier. But anything we want to do that is going to make Canada's economy stronger is not going to be about increasing taxes, increasing tariffs. It's going to be about reducing our taxes, reducing our tariffs, and making it so that, our overly burdensome and duplicative regulatory burdens, where the feds try to do the same thing as the provinces, and then business owners have to file paperwork to fit with both. If we do away with that, the more we manage to do away with that, the better off we're going to come out, and the better our response to U.S. tariffs is going to be, because it's going to be all about making Canada's economy stronger, bigger, and having people with better wages and cheaper goods.
Hear, hear. Right? If Washington, D.C. wants to hammer Americans with new taxes, it doesn't mean that Ottawa should be hammering Canadians with new taxes. In fact, we got to be cutting taxes. I think the government has to go on a major tax cutting campaign. I'm just going to add a couple other points here. And the industrial carbon tax. Okay, look, the Washington, D.C., it doesn't matter which party is occupying the White House, whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, they're not bringing in a carbon tax, right? So the Carney government's hitting carbon tax on Canadian businesses will push Canadian entrepreneurs to cut production in Canada, set up shops south of the border in the United States, which means higher prices here at home and fewer jobs for Canadians. Another thing I'm going to put on your radar, folks, is the Carney government is also talking about carbon tariffs, right? Essentially a carbon tax on goods that we import from other countries. But then also let's look at the wholeness of Canada's major disgusting tax burden, where the average Canadian family is now paying more in taxes than what they're paying for food, clothing, and housing combined. Almost 50% of the average Canadian family's budget is going to taxes. So, take your paycheck, rip it in half, because that half is the tax man's. But then if we zoom out and we compare Canada's taxation with other countries, I mean, we're doing awful, right? Canada ranks 31st out of 38 OECD industrialized countries on income tax competitiveness. That's awful. We rank 26th on business tax competitiveness. Okay, on both measures, we rank behind the United States. So, Renaud, I think your point is so good, right? Tariffs are just a tax. We don't need any more taxes. We got to cut taxes. We got to cut red tape. And that's actually how we'll make Canada's economy strong. Now, Renaud, I want to be mindful of your time. I know you got to run. You're a busy man. But I just noticed that I have to ask you about this. We got you here. I got to ask you. The Montreal Economic Institute just put out a new report. Okay, it's titled Privatizing Canada Post, Lessons from Germany. Now, Renaud, I say, yeah, like sell it. We don't need a crown corporation handing out mail. So Renaud, why don't you just tell us, like, what lessons can we learn from Germany, and why do we got to privatize Canada Post?
I mean, first out, the why is kind of easy. Look, there's a way to do postal services profitably, and the fact is, there's a lot of companies that do it in Canada. UPS, all of these companies, smaller ones, they do postal services they do parcel delivery, and they do fast letter mail delivery. Now, part of the issue with Canada Post is that there's things where it still has a government monopoly. If you want to send a regular letter, you can send it with Canada Post, but if you want to send it with a third-party delivery company, like one of those FedEx, UPS, Pure Later, by law, they have to charge 3 times as much minimum than what Canada Post is going to charge you. So that gives Canada Post a monopoly on a shrinking market that is the letter mail market. What Germany did is, back in the late 80s, it sort of had the same issue that we have today with our postal service. It was loss-making, inefficient. Again, like it was costing a whole bunch of money to the government. Just like Canada Post last year posted a $841 million deficit, which is, again, not nothing. Definitely not record-breaking by the federal government standards, but still not nothing. Well, what Germany did is, over the course of about 20 years, they first liberalized the postal market. So they allowed everybody to compete in the letter mail segment. But then they progressively decided that, they were going to privatize the postal service. And what we found, actually, is that since the 80s, the price to send postage in Germany has gone down by about 10% when we adjust for inflation. Whereas in Canada, it's increased by about 50%. So it's very clear that the system in Germany, where there is competition, where there are a number of different providers, has worked to the consumer's benefit. It's also, there's studies that have shown that the postal services in Germany are some of the fastest in Europe. So clearly it has worked for consumers, and it has also worked out well for governments. Because instead of being a loss-making corporation like Canada Post with its $840 million deficits, the various postal companies now pay tax dollars in corporate taxes and contribute to the German government's coffers. So it was a win for consumers. It ended up being a win for the postal service, and it also ended up being a win for the government. And that's why we think, this sort of win-win-win is something that we should try to do as much.
Well, I like the win-win-win. My least favorite of those wins is win for the government. But hey, but I do like the win-win-win. Renaud, let's end it there. Let's end it on a happy note. Ladies and gentlemen, Renaud Brossard, Vice President of Communications for the Montreal Economic Institute. Renaud, thank you so much for coming on the show. And do you want to plug anything for our viewers here?
Absolutely. Well, first off, Franco, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, always a blast. And for for the listeners, for the viewers, if you want to check out the great content from the MEI, you can do so at www.iedm.org. That's www.iedm.org. And I have to say, one of my personal favorites, this Canada Post publication, it's right up there. You can read it. You can see for yourself why that works so well in Germany and how we can actually do it in Canada. Because we're not just making the case for here's why Canada Post should be privatized. We're also making the case for here's how the government can do it and do it successfully.
Amazing. Didn't you love that, folks? What a great show. Making the case for tax cuts and selling off failing crown corporations. Oh, my two favorite topics, right? So anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. Go check out Renaud's great work over there at the Montreal Economic Institute. And also head over to the CTF's website, taxpayer.com. We've got some great content on the newsroom, got some great petitions for you to sign, and you can join the tax fighting army over at taxpayer.com.